At issue, that chaotic question period and the debate over the decriminalization of some hard drugs.
Will the Prime Minister accept the BC NDP's demand to recriminalize those drugs?
Trudeau didn't answer directly. Instead, he accused Poilievre of courting extremists while visiting carbon tax protesters, which led to this.
When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister?
Poilievre was tossed from the Commons and his caucus followed. What's to be made over the battle over BC's drug policies? What are the politics at play? Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down on At Issue Tonight. Chantal Hebert, Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see you all. Let's start with the antics, the chaos inside the House on that day. Chantal, what do you make of Mr. Poilievre and the dismissal and the subsequent sort of incredible moment where everyone walked out?
And also the Prime Minister's efforts to try to throw back every question at the Conservatives with questions about something else. I found the next day question period, where everyone seemed to have taken a Valium, much more productive in terms of information and debate. And I figured that if everyone came back in those calmer states, they probably realized that it didn't look as good on them as they would like, except for the partisans who give them money on both sides.
Yeah, and because both of them fundraised off that moment, we should point out. And Chantal, you're right as well, that the Prime Minister, instead of answering the questions substantively, which he did do the next day, went after Poilievre, as I said, on other issues. Andrew, what did you make of it?
I think the referee lost control of the game. There were certainly antics on all sides, not to say equal antics, but antics on all sides. Sure. If you recall, actually, there was something much worse that Poilievre said in my books than calling somebody a wacko, was he said the Prime Minister had been a practicing racist for half his life. He was properly called back on that by the Speaker and yielded. The Prime Minister then came in saying that he was, courting white nationalists and that he was spineless. He was called on that, and he stepped back. But by then, tempers had gotten up. There was one MP who was called out for calling the Speaker disgraceful, but she was in the process of withdrawing it when she was tossed out. Yep. And I think that inflamed things. And then, if you watch the tape, you can see Poilievre is basically in adolescent mode. He's testing to see how far he can get away with. And for a person in a position of authority should know, you pick your spots. You don't have to insist on every point. Yep. When he was called out for the wacko thing, he made a show of saying, well, I replace it. Effectively, in my books, that's a withdrawal. I think it was within the Speaker's discretion to say, okay, let's cool down here, don't do it again, kind of thing. Instead, you could see the Speaker feeling like he had to assert his authority at that moment, and I think he basically played into Poilievre's hands. He gave him the clip he needed, he gave him the fundraising opportunity, although the Liberals were also fundraising. I don't think it was a great moment for anybody, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, he would have had the clip regardless of whether he withdrew it or not. That's the point, I think, too, there, Althia. The fact that the Speaker, who has had many confrontations since he got that job, chose that moment to move and discipline Mr. Poilievre was interesting.
I don't think the Speaker had any choice, frankly. Both Speaker Fergus and before him, Anthony Rota, who was the Speaker, have faced this difficult position where they actually feel like the Conservative caucus are baiting them to throw them out. Raquel Dancho, who's a Manitoba MP, I believe she called the Prime Minister a liar about 2 years ago, and she did not withdraw, and so she was named and she was kicked out. And she had a press conference outside the doors of the House, and she said that she had been kicked out for telling the truth. And what I'm told is the Conservatives made $1 million off of that fundraising initiative. So Andrew is right about the racist and the spineless, but the Speaker has let the word racist slide many, many, many times. When you have the leader of the official opposition name-calling the Prime Minister a wacko, and this is the first time. I know there are many Conservatives on social media saying the term has been used before. It has been used. It has been used as an adjective. We did some research. It has been used. One member said, well, referring to themselves as a wacko, but no one has ever called another person a wacko. This is not appropriate. So the Speaker had no choice but to lay down the law. And yes, he was trying, Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre tried to be cute, saying, I withdraw, and I replaced with the word extremist. That is not a proper withdrawal. So they didn't want to give them this chance to make, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But really, he had no choice. He has
Yeah.
to maintain decorum. And the first person to thank him was the leader of the Bloc Québécois for maintaining order in the chamber. Otherwise, it goes down.
Let me move it back to the issue, because the issue itself, unfortunately, I think that's the other thing that happened that wasn't great for the Conservatives. It got lost that day. They went back to it the next day, and there was a conversation around it. But it is an issue that is important, where people's lives are at risk, and where there is a real difference of opinion about whether decriminalization should be happening in BC, and now a request from the City of Toronto. What did you make of the politics around that issue, Chantal, itself?
Well, for one, BC did not request that, contrary to what the Conservatives are saying, did not request that hard drugs, small quantities of hard drugs, be recriminalized. No. The request from BC is for the federal government to amend the exemption. It's a pilot project. Yeah. It's supposed to run for 3 years. It's not the law of the land, and what BC wants is to modify it to make it clear that you cannot be having these drugs in public places, children's playground, go down the list. It has become a huge issue in BC, and there is an election coming. Right. And I have seen no evidence from the answers from the government that they will not amend it. The fact is, if you're looking at the real issue, it is probable that the housing crisis has met the opioid crisis. And so, yes, you are not criminalizing people who are using small quantities, but many of them are homeless. Yeah. And so they are doing so in public places. What I found interesting on the second day is the Prime Minister did not say he would say no to Toronto and eventually Montreal for the same exemption, but he did say that the government had turned down an early request from the City of Vancouver and only agreed when the provincial government of BC asked for that 3-year pilot project, i.e. if Premier Ford in Ontario, Premier Legault do not want to go there, then Montreal and Toronto won't be allowed to go there.
And Premier Ford doesn't want to go there. He's already made that clear. Andrew?
There's a tendency to retreat into absolutes on this, that either decriminalization or not decriminalization, or either you choose the Alberta harm reduction model or you choose the BC, safe alternatives, safe supply. I don't see why it has to be one or the other. On the decriminalization, it seems clear that, if we thought we could just decriminalize and let her rip, that was too simple. And we have not paid perhaps due regard to the surrounding communities and to the interests of the public about how and where that is exercised. So the rollback by the BC government, partial rollback, I think was in order. I would prefer it if the opposition were simply looking at it in those terms rather than, as we've seen from the Conservatives, simply saying, well, we can't have any decriminalization at all. Anything like that is leading us on the road to perdition. So I think there's lessons to be drawn from that. But, should we take the Alberta model or the BC model? I'm not sure why we can't do a little bit of both. Yeah. What's clear is decriminalization has to be accompanied by continuing concern both for the broader community and for the addicts themselves, who are not in a position to simply, fend for themselves entirely without some help and guidance.
Sure. Quick 30 seconds to you, Althia.
I think there's two issues at play. One is is it the bright conservative strategy? It is, we may not like it, but it's an effective communication strategy in that they are trying to tie the BC experience and put that at the feet of the Prime Minister, as in it was Justin Trudeau's fault and it's Justin Trudeau's agenda to do this, and you should all be scared because people are going to be smoking crack in the hospital near you. And then there is the issue, the public health issue, which is what is the right response? And I think what we're seeing, and to everybody's point, is everybody's kind of struggling with what is the right response and how to accompany it. And frankly, pilot programs and public policy should be continuously looked at. We have an idea. We think the evidence tells us this. Let's try it. Oh, we didn't anticipate that people would be smoking crack at the hospital. Well, that's not a good idea. Let's make sure we fix that. And let's continue to keep monitoring and let's continue to keep evaluating. That's how public policy should be made. So I don't think we should lose sight of that.
And what's clear is there can't be a retreat back to just pure criminalization. Nobody's calling for that. The police, first of all, are not calling for it.
Pierre Poilievre strongly hinted this week a future Conservative government would be willing to use the notwithstanding clause on issues like bail reform and prison transfers for convicted murderers.
We will make them constitutional using whatever tools the Constitution allows me to use.
A federal government has never used the notwithstanding clause before. Poilievre says his decision will be guided by the people.
Democratically accountable to the people, and they can then make the judgments themselves on whether they think my laws are constitutional.
So are there any risks in this, and how to explain why Poilievre is considering it? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Andrew, why don't you start us off on this? What did you make of Mr. Poilievre's comments around this?
Well, with each passing week, Pierre Poilievre puts another red flag, or at least yellow flag of caution, in the window for people who are considering getting rid of this current government. If you think this government has passed its sell-by date, it's incompetent, it's corrupt, not particularly strong in its defense of the charter. I note that the government has yet to bring in a charter statement on its online harms bill, which it's required to do. So it's not a particularly sterling record itself on that. But if you're tired and want to get rid of this government, you should know that one of the consequences, one of the costs of that, if you bring in the Conservatives, is they're going to bring in the notwithstanding clause. I think it's very clear. I think it's not the first time he said it, in fact. So you're going to see for the first time a federal government invoking it. You're essentially accelerating the decline of the charter into effectively a dead letter. If it becomes routine to invoke the notwithstanding clause, as we are rapidly on the way to doing it, then it's basically, obey the charter unless you don't feel like it. So people just need to be able to bear that in mind.
Sure, but it's there, and it is a tool that he can use democratically, to his point.
I'm not saying it's illegal. I'm just saying it's unwise.
Okay, Chantal, your thoughts?
So clearly what Mr. Poilievre has in mind is to resurrect a number of pieces of legislation on the law and order front that were found unconstitutional by the courts. There are a few consequences to that, including the fact that if the federal government starts normalizing suspending rights that are in the charter at some point becomes a piece of paper full of good intentions. But one of those consequences for Mr. Poilievre is that he will be, as of that moment, under intense pressure from the large section of his caucus that is pro-life to do something about abortion and to use it to get around where we are at this point on abortion rights. The other issue that I don't think he's considered is he will be walking himself in possibly a constitutional crisis. Why? Because I'm not convinced that anytime soon he's going to have enough members in the Senate to endorse his use of the notwithstanding clause, and the Senate needs to endorse it for him to use it.
We did ask him the day after he had given this speech to, I should say, a group of police officers who were happy to hear it. We did ask him what are the limits? When would you use it? How often would you use it? He didn't answer any of those questions. So we don't know. Would it apply to the things Chantal is talking about or not, Althia?
Well, the example he gave was if you have multiple murders, that the only way you would get out of prison is in a box. And he talked about his laws. And I think that there's, and maybe this is where Andrew is going, there's kind of this authoritarian streak that is emerging out of Mr. Poilievre that I think is part of the Conservatives feeling very confident that they're going to have a crushing majority and do not need to court kind of the soft centrist votes that in the past kind of kept that same team around Mr. Harper, if you want, in check. So they're looking at this opportunity, and they're not going to have a secret agenda. Their agenda is out there for everyone to see it. But this is what they want to do. And finally, they can talk about it openly and they can do it. Now, I don't think that they're going to touch anything to do with abortion. Frankly, they don't need to touch the charter to talk about abortion and to allow private members' bills to talk about abortion. But I do think that it has significant impacts for the rest of the Federation. One, and everybody else has made that point, as soon as the federal government uses notwithstanding clause, free reign. All the provincial premiers, go ahead. What that means for Bill 21, the bill in Quebec that is going to possibly, we don't know because the Supreme Court hasn't said whether or not they're going to hear the case, but this is a bill that prevents people that wear religious symbols from holding certain public-facing public employment in Quebec. So teachers, lawyers, public police officers, judges, that they can't work for the province because they wear a kippah or a headscarf. There's the bill in Quebec on language, Bill 96. You think back about the 3 times Premier Ford has tried to use it in Ontario. So yes, it does beg the question, then what use is the charter? Like the only thing that holds the check of the notwithstanding clause is the assumption that there will be a public outcry. And Mr. Poilievre is saying, if there is a public outcry, it doesn't matter because I will have the democratic legitimacy to use this tool.
But he has the democratic legitimacy of the majority that elect him, and the charter is supposed to protect the minority as well, is my understanding, Andrew.
Well, also, the charter was passed by a democratically elected parliament with the support of 9 of the 10 legislatures. So, look, it is a remarkable ill timing to this because one of the more heartening things of late has been Conservatives rediscovering the value of the charter on things that they care about. So, for example, on the Emergencies Act, or on some of these online regulatory bills that are clearly, in my view, offside of the charter. Well, okay, if you want to be able to invoke the charter then for things that you care about, you're not going to be able to if you've been, you know, craftily undermining it and negating support for it and making it into a dead letter in the meantime. So Conservatives who are, you know, libertarian-minded Conservatives need to think long and hard about this, whether they go down this road, and particularly to be invoking, well, the public's behind me on this. Yeah. I don't know whether it's authoritarian, but it's certainly the populist idea that, you know, whatever the public wants at any given moment, it should get, regardless of the Constitution or the laws or, you know, rules or any of these sort of larger contexts in which democracy is embedded, and it's very dangerous.
Chantal?
I guess those who are worried should be thankful that at some point, and I do believe the Supreme Court will hear the appeal on Quebec's Bill 21, the Supreme Court is going to be asked whether it wants to rethink its stance on the notwithstanding clause and its preventive use or its blanket use. That should be interesting. And for those who think it's a foregone conclusion, this is the same court that rewrote its stance on medically assisted death. So rewrites are possible. It should be an interesting conversation.
10 seconds, Althia, if you can do it.
I agree. It will be interesting, and I don't know. I really wish we weren't having this conversation. I think that there are certain norms that need to be kept, and I feel that we're being challenged all the time. But we will see. We'll see what the public mood is like, because Ontario surprised us.
The only thing worse than invoking the notwithstanding clause, in my opinion, would be the Senate overturning that. Okay. At least Poilievre had to get himself elected.
A new report shows Canada's emissions increased in 2022 as the economy rebounded post-pandemic. But the Minister of the Environment says the country will meet its climate goals.
Canada remains on track to meet our emission reduction goals of 2026 and on track towards 2030.
So are the government measures to fight climate change working as intended? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Althia, you can start us off here. I would note that Conservatives like to say that Canada has missed all its climate change goals. This government has actually not yet missed a goal, a target. It might, but it says that it won't after seeing this report today.
Well, it's actually been saying that for several months, saying that the measures that it has put in place will allow it to meet its targets. Will they? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I think that they are hopeful that some of the work that they spend years doing is finally going to bear fruit. I don't really think that, I don't know. I was trying to struggle. Is it really going to matter whether or not they miss their targets? I think we're so used to people missing their targets. I think what's most important is that people feel like they're on a direction where change is possible. And I don't know that the election's going to revolve around that, or people are really going to care as much.
No, but they are the ones who set the targets and have been quite adamant about them. So I think they've set the expectation that they're going to hit them. Would be my counter to that.
Yeah,
okay, but
go ahead,
you're not gonna get to judge on that in the next federal election.
No, that's right. No, you're not. No.
That target is way past that. So, and if they lose government, at best we'll have a we would, but they didn't kind of conversation. I'm not sure that 2021 and the pandemic is much of a baseline to judge.
No.
The fact that 2022 saw an increase in the emissions, I think that what's more interesting is, yes, the curve of the hike has flattened a bit. I'm not saying we're there, but I don't think you should go year to year when you're talking about the pandemic and 2022.
For sure. But they have not, they have yet to do the cap on the oil and gas emissions, which they said they were going to do like soon, and now he's again saying it's going to be this fall. So you can expect that all of that is, I would imagine, politically timed as well, Andrew.
Well, they've yet to do a lot of things. If you recall the Environment Commissioner's report from last year, in which he said they were nowhere near to meeting their targets, that a lot of their projections are just basically wishes and hopes and fond assumptions, but not the policies themselves aren't actually in place. I did think the minister found the most positive possible way to express, statistics showing that, yes, the numbers are up for the second year running. They're only down 7% from their 2005 targets, and that's only with a little bit of creative accounting. The Environment Commissioner warned last year they would probably try to show more progress by raising the projections backdated to 2005. So if you start from a higher number, then you can get a 7% reduction.
Yeah.
Okay, 7% reduction now after what, 17 years. We're supposed to get another 35 to 40% in the next 8 years. I remain skeptical, as do a lot of people.
Yeah. To Althia's point, and let me ask this to Chantal, and then we'll go back to Althia. Does it matter? If we're not going to know before the next election, and all they can show right now is some progress, and as Andrew points out, maybe not as much as it should be.
It would matter if they were running against a main rival that is promising to do better. But that's not the situation they are in. The choices are starker than that. A government that is interested in climate change and a government that doesn't sound like it is.
Althia?
I think the biggest challenge is for them to actually get the stuff that they've promised out the door. It took them 6 years to get the clean fuel regulations out. They say it's not going to take that long, for example, to get the cap on emissions out. It certainly should not take that long. But I think really the conversation has changed. And with the NDP's votes over the last month and some of the rhetoric coming out of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's mouth, it doesn't seem like targets is really where the conversation is. The conversation is, how do people feel it in their pocketbook, and who should be paying the cost of climate change? And I think that's where that conversation is going.
Last word to you, Andrew.
Well, it may matter if 2030, because you may find governments in other countries by that point starting to put border tariffs on against countries that haven't met their targets.
Oh, absolutely.
But much more important, in my view, than whether we exactly meet our targets is what means we choose. And what's equally true of both parties, although worse in the Conservative side, is neither of them are taking the lowest cost approach. The federal government at least is in favor of carbon pricing, but it also layers on all kinds of other subsidies and regulations. And the Conservatives don't even want to have that part that's carbon pricing. So we're doing it at much more cost than we need to.
Okay, gotta go. Thank you all for a good ad issue this week. Every week is good, but don't forget you can catch The National on YouTube and CBC Gem. You can catch me on Rosemary Barton Live Sundays at 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching.